Hello everyone, Jeff here, and in this week's episode we're going to be taking a look at the philosophy and the process that goes into world building and creating lore for Antilia. And I'd like to introduce you to one of the proud traditions we have in creating lore for Antilia, which is doing research, and in today's episode we're even going to be doing a bit of an experiment. So if you will join me in my kitchen, we'll see what we can cook up. So before we get into that process and the philosophy that goes into world building and creating lore for Antilia, first I want to talk a little bit about what you see in the background here. Now originally I captured audio with this, and that's why I'm doing a lot of gesturing here, but the audio quality just did not turn out the way I needed it for this video. So I've gone ahead and just recut some audio on top of this to describe what's going on here. What I'm trying to do with this experiment is just get a feel for some of the basic raw materials that the Taipei had access to, specifically centered around the way they built canvas tents and how they waterproof things. Now this may seem like, complete overkill, that you really don't need to do this. And honestly, you don't. You could almost certainly watch a couple videos and get the basic gist for it. But what I'm trying to do is get practical experience, kind of experience the pitfalls, and as I go along here, I'm certainly going to be doing that. Just running into the absolute mess that it creates, and that's going to get into their fur, and it's going to be awful. So I'm just kind of experimenting with these materials. These are all materials that they would have pretty good access to, just kind of a basic, almost cotton-like cloth. One of these is kind of a canvas, the other one's a little thinner. And then I've got a variety of oils and waxes. I'm going to be trying to create what's known as oilcloth and waxed cotton. Now I'm not really following the original historically accurate way of doing that by any means. This is more just, this is how the Taipei would go into these problems. You've got these raw materials, let's put them together and see if we can make something that's better than the sum of its parts, perhaps. So you're going to see me in the background kind of experimenting a little bit. I'm going to be kind of making a giant mess is what I'm going to discover I make. But we'll sort that out at the end, and we'll see how the resulting material turns out, if it's of any use, if we learned anything or not. One of the things that I try to do when building Antilia is put the typical, kind of the stereotypical fantasy world that we've seen over and over again already in novels and video games, kind of put that aside and just approach Antilia as if this is just an alien world. We don't know much about it. Obviously, it does have a lot of the same sort of resources when it comes to trees and fish. We have these large insect creatures. That kind of changes things a bit. And what I try and do is rediscover all the basic core problems that a civilization and individuals would face, and then look at the world around them, look at the resources they have at their disposal, and figure out how they're going to solve those problems, rather than just assume everything's going to be like, say, medieval Europe. I'd like to try to recreate their own culture, and sometimes that borrows from lots of different cultures. I like to do a lot of research, watching videos on different ways, older times before we were surrounded by technology, how we solve these kind of problems. Just get a feel for that, and then figure out what the Taipei would do given a certain problem and the resources they have at hand. When I'm trying to build the culture of a civilization, there's two different approaches that I like to use. There's the sort of top-down way of doing it, where you have almost a list of items that you need to check off. What's their technology look like? What's their economy look like? And you just go through this kind of list. The other is the first person perspective, which I like to do a lot. That I think I get some of my best, most creative ideas from doing this kind of first person exercise, where I put myself in the role of a individual in that civilization, and I kind of walk through their day and look at the things that they encounter. What kind of items do they need in their inventory? Oh, they need to write something down. What kind of writing instrument are they going to use? What are they going to write on? I like to look at all those kind of things from a first person perspective, and I come up with a lot of things that are easy to overlook when you do it from top down. Now, people who are extremely experienced doing it, world building, they probably don't have that same sort of difficulty, but this is kind of my first world, so I use both tools. Sometimes I do it from top down, sometimes I do it from first person, and I generally like the way that what kind of results that gives for me. Now, even having a basic understanding of the different civilizations and their cultures, there's still quite a bit more world building to do, and that is putting all the different cultures together on a single timeline. Now they all live on the same planet together, and you're weaving them together through time, basically. You're having them interact with one another and bump into each other a little bit. And that's something that Antilia, it needs more work, honestly, but it is something that I have put some effort into, and there is some general idea. I do have a general timeline that I've been working on lately that explains a sort of what state the world is in and how did it get there, which are critical questions. And finally, the reason for doing all this is so that when we take a player and we transport them into the world of Antilia, there's something new to discover. There's lots of new things to discover and explore and learn about. Learning about the Taipi's culture, learning about the race Sui's culture, learning about the history of the world and the way all these different races have grown up and interacted with one another. I want it to be really engaging and interesting. And from the standpoint of creating a believable simulation of this world, I think it's really important for us as developers to know all the way to the very core of their foundation who the Saki, Taipii, and Reisui are. So let's get back to our experiment here. So what did we learn from all of this? One, it was real interesting to me to get my hands on the materials that the Taipii would have access to. And I think that's the biggest takeaway, is just getting a feel for how that process works, what the materials feel like, what the result feels like, and just doing the process and understanding what they'd have to do in their lives. The second thing that I learned, and this is probably an even bigger takeaway, is if you're going to do this, don't do it in your own kitchen. Go find a friend who invites you over a lot that you don't want to go to their house ever again. Do it in their kitchen, and you'll have a much better time. It really made a mess, and I imagine for the Taipii, one of the things that I'm most curious about is to actually go out and buy maybe a little square fur and figure out how much of a mess this is for them trying to get this stuff out of their fur. Now, I think that the results were actually not terribly surprising, but quite good. I think all the waxed cotton, these canvases, they came out mostly the same. There's not a big difference between the three different waxes I tried. I was thinking that the one here on the left, the beeswax, was going to be more flexible in the end, but it turned out not really. It feels just about the same as the paraffin all the way here on the right. It really does feel like the same thing. So I'm kind of disappointed that the beeswax didn't do anything more interesting. I also noticed the beeswax has an incredible smell to it, whereas the others have almost no odor. In fact, I was kind of thinking the beeswax was going to be most like what the Taipii have, you know, getting their waxes from the various Kuran stuff. Now, the one in the middle, I had this palm wax one. It really didn't do anything interesting. There's nothing particularly interesting to learn from it, other than all the waxes basically behave the same. And I think one of the things I was learning along the way was just use less of the wax, having it soak through the cotton and leave these marks on the other side. That really didn't work out too well. I really needed to be thinner. And I've played with this before, honestly, and I've had much better results than I had this time. And towards the end with these paraffin waxes, the results were much better because I was learning as I went to keep the wax thin. Now, with the oilcloth, I was fairly disappointed with this. I tried running water on it real quick, and I immediately noticed that it started getting wet and started bleeding on the other side. Or sweating, I should say, not bleeding. It was sweating water, and eventually it does start to drip. So I'm not very impressed with the oilcloth. I know you can do that properly. I probably wasn't using the right process for that. I think I need, rather than mineral oil or hemp oil, which is what I was using, I think I need something like a flax oil or maybe a linseed oil and some sort of binder that makes it stay in the fabric better. So I don't think I know the process for that one well enough, so maybe I'll just throw those results out. But for what I was trying to accomplish, just understanding the waxed cotton, I think the results were pretty conclusive. It's definitely a water barrier. Now, if you fold it and stuff, you're probably going to have problems, but in the end, I think the takeaway was it was a successful experiment. I think I understand something that the Taipii would craft and what its uses would be. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed. I had a lot of fun. I like doing these kind of projects, and I like learning about things like this. I think it's a critical part if you're going to make a project like this or do any kind of writing to know something about what you're dealing with. I'm already looking forward to making another one. You can see I've got some clay here. I'd love to play around a little bit with kind of learning how bricks are made and how walls and structures might function. So if you have any questions or comments, as always, leave them in the comment section below. I love reading your guys' comments, and I hope to see you next time. And until then, take care.